Good afternoon and welcome to episode 2 of Facebook Live. I'm here with Eric Gunderson and Greg Welch today, and we're going to talk about karting. If you joined our last show, thanks for joining us and sharing and all that other stuff that we did. It was a good time. We're going to talk about a couple of different topics. Eric, how are you?
I am good. I'm glad to be back. I am stoked that Greg is joining us. He was one of the first people to reach out after the show to say that he liked it and that he wanted to be part of it. And hopefully we've come up with some good questions to ask him, and people will find it interesting to learn a little bit about his backstory. So thanks for coming on, Greg.
Yeah, thank you guys for having me. It's cool to be here, cool to be a part of it. I'm always happy to try to spread the word.
Yeah, you got to spread the good word, right? You got to get your evangelist shirt on.
Exactly.
If you've accepted karting into your life. I think that's probably the most ugliest font ever. So, down in your area, Eric, it looks like there's some indoor ice racing going on.
Yeah.
What's going on with that?
Yeah, so I think it's originally a guy named Rodney Ebersol, who's kind of a local mad scientist sort of type out here, been racing in the region for a long, long time. Got involved with a traveling ice racing series. I think they're based in Wisconsin, and they primarily race quads and motorcycles. And he said, hey, what can we do to bring karts? And so he told a bunch of us that it was going to be a thing and that people were going to come out to the Budweiser Event Center here in Denver. And so I think 4 karts were on the ice for the first year, which is a little small, but from the videos and the pictures I've seen, it looks like it was actually a really cool event, and the karts were getting around pretty quick. They ran on studded tires, and kind of reminded me of a lot of other indoor racing you see, on dirt with midget cars and things like that. So from everything I've heard, it sounded like it was a really cool event. So I think we have some photos. Hopefully we can share them. People can check it out, see what ice racing looks like.
Yeah, I'm trying to dig them up here. Greg, how about you? Have you seen any of this ice racing down your way?
So I'm in the same place as Eric, really. So I saw the same thing, Rodney kind of put something together up at the Budweiser Event Center. It looks super fun, something I definitely need to do, on the bucket list for karting. Just go drive one on the ice, slide around, like it just looks super cool. So something I'll definitely, try to check out next year if it happens again.
Good deal. So, Greg, tell us a little bit about your karting story. How did you get involved in kart racing and why?
Why? I would say why, because we're crazy. It's right? Probably the best way I can say that. No, but like probably a lot of people, we went to a track, we tried a go-kart, thought it was cool, had fun, and then, a few months later, when it was Christmas time, there was a go-kart sitting under the tree. It was something that was expected for my brother and I to share. That lasted about a day. And then, then it was 2 go-karts, and then it was a bigger trailer, and then it was, then it snowballed from there. But I got into it in the late 90s, like 1997. So Flathead Briggs was, what we did for the first few years, and, just kind of built from there.
So eventually it turned into your dad started his own karting business, or even chassis line, with different parts. And at one point you had the Shockwave chassis, and you had drivers like Nick Neary and other drivers, including yourself, of course, racing on that chassis. So you mentioned that you transitioned from kind of having you and Jeff and the Welch family fighting over one go-kart, and then that turned into multiple. How did your dad make that leap? I mean, I know he was a machinist for a long time before that.
Yeah, so, really, I mean, after the first race at the track, when I was racing in, basically Junior 1, my brother was racing in Junior 2, same go-kart, same rule set, but we had to bolt like a different 50 or 60 pounds of lead on and off the go-kart for the 2 of us to share it and use it. Like I said, that only lasted 1 day, and then it was time to find another go-kart. I'm impressed my mom stayed around through this whole debacle that went down. But no, my dad was a CNC machinist. We started the machine shop in our garage, grew it into a decent sized business. We started manufacturing parts, just kind of for our go-karts. So we started making, the little spacers and just the stuff that was quick to turn out. And we realized pretty quickly that there was a market for, US made products for, higher quality, kind of machine components. So, he started Shockwave, I think, in 2001, maybe 2002, and we were a component manufacturer primarily for, I'd say like 8 years before we added the chassis line to the mix. And we did the chassis line for probably 4 or 5 years before my parents retired. So
the chassis line lasted for a while. Eventually, your dad kind of gets out of it. He retires. He goes and enjoys hiking and skiing and all the things that he enjoys now. But he's still involved with it. So he's still at the racetrack sometimes in your ear or watching you at the racetrack. But as I recall, as you've told me, you transitioned from racing essentially on a factory ride with your parent as the kart owner and as the shop owner to then becoming a major tuner and traveling around and seeing, karting from a bunch of different chassis manufacturers' perspectives, working with a bunch of different drivers. Talk to us about when that happened and when you realized that you kind of had to leave the nest, so to speak, and go and work with other people.
Yeah, I mean, I think everyone that loves it and is really involved with it, as they start getting older, they take an interest in, working with the younger drivers and the kids and stuff like that, right? So, when I was 15 years old, 14 years old, that was when I kind of just started, I'd grab the random kid running cadet go-karts and just help him for, no reason then it was fun to do, So, yeah, I mean, by the time I was, 20 years old and moved out of the house and on my own, it was like, all right, I guess I can't play go-kart anymore. But I still want to be involved with it. So I guess it's time to go to work. And, did the tuning thing for a couple of years before moving to Unser, which is where I'm at now.
So that transition to Unser was not quite as straightforward as I think a lot of people realize. You didn't go from being, this master tuner traveling all over the country directly into being the general manager essentially now for multiple projects, both the Put In Pro Shop and then Unser Karting Centennial. So from what you told me, you kind of started basically working at the concession karting stand and the rental karting stand at the Unser Denver location, working hands-on with clients, learning the business, probably not having some fun days at times. But then you made a big commitment and a big kind of bold move to present to them your notion of a performance division. So can you talk a little bit about that and kind of what you remember from that?
Yeah, I mean, I basically was hired as a customer service representative. So I was the person that, you walk in the door, hey, how are you? How many races you guys want to do? And when we first opened this, so this was at the indoor track. And when we first opened the indoor track, we did many things insanely wrong. And, it's something we talk about all the time, all the stupid things we've done along the way, but, we figure it out and we've, turned it into a really, really good operation. But, after I was there for about 6 weeks, like literally every single rental cart we had broke and we didn't have anything that could go around the track. So, the guy that ran the rental cart shop basically, kind of sat down with all of us and he said, one of the best mechanics that we have in this facility is standing behind a desk, selling people go-kart races. Like, let's put them to work and actually make a mechanic. So I fixed rental carts for a little while before, like you said, Eric, I kind of pitched the idea that we needed, there was a hole in the marketplace in Colorado for kart shops, for go-kart sales. And we started, what we call the performance division, which is it's a full service kart shop race team. And we started that at the indoor center, ran that for about 4 or 5 years, kind of built that business up and eventually we got our hands on the former Track at Centennial property and have an outdoor track now, which is really, really cool.
So how did that, because, you know, it's interesting. Even today, I'll talk to people and they'll say, oh, I didn't know that the Track at Centennial is open. I thought it had closed and shut down permanently. So without maybe getting too inside baseball or telling us anything that you can't tell us, how did that come along? Because I'm guessing that wasn't so straightforward as coming up to someone and saying, hey, I want to take this track over. You know, that's a massive commitment and a massive undertaking for Summit Management and Unser Karting Centennial now to take on. So what was that conversation like?
Well, you know, like you said, I probably can't divulge everything on how it all went down, but, you know, it was something that we worked on for a couple years. You know, so we had a lot of conversations, a lot of negotiations with the airport, with the previous management, you know, just trying to get that deal done. And there were multiple times throughout the process where we thought that it was over. And, you know, I think it was end of December in 2015, when the previous management actually closed the gates. Like, I thought that the gates were going to be closed forever, that the track was going to get bulldozed. We were going to get some airplane hangars put on it. And within the course of just a few weeks, it all of a sudden came back alive. And we were able to, you know, negotiate a long-term lease on the property.
Right.
So, but I mean, it was a tornado. It was up and down. It was a whirlwind. You know, like I said, there was many times throughout the process where we thought it was never going to be a thing.
Well, that's interesting. I mean, to go from kind of almost maxing out your shop space at Unser Denver to all of a sudden having this new playground and essentially a new toy that you guys are not sure what to do with, and you're dealing with the airport, and you're dealing with so many regulations. I remember, I was obviously not the first one there, but I remember showing up and seeing where you guys have gotten it to now, and talking to someone like Shane Honkinen, who works at customer experience there. To go from that to where you guys are now has been a massive undertaking, and a story in and of itself. But looking back, I mean, it seems like your career throughout karting was a bunch of different, I mean, you seem to, I think, undersell them, but there were a lot of big leaps of faith. You know, first leaving your dad and saying, okay, I think I can make a go of this on my own, walking up to, I assume, some of the people you already knew in karting, and convincing them to hire you as a full-time mechanic. Then convincing them to take on this performance division, which I would imagine a lot of them didn't have a ton of experience with performance karting right out of the gate. So what do you think the key was there for making those jumps? Was it just you had put in the time and put in the effort, or is there something uniquely Greg Welch in your approach there that helps you kind of make those transitions really well?
I can tell you that, so the first transition, you know, from my parents getting out of it to me kind of going out on my own, that one wasn't necessarily voluntary, right? My dad, my mom, they basically just said, you know, hey, we're out, so have fun. You know, like we're gonna go do something else. We're gonna retire. So, you know, that one was just kind of, you know, it was a cool moment. It was one of those moments you have to get through in life. But, you know, that was one of those things where it's like, all right, I can either go to work or, you know, it sounds like I'm moving back in with my parents. That's not going to happen. So I guess we're going to work. But yeah, I mean, with Unser, the owner of Unser, a guy named Scott Sutton, he's just a really good guy. He's a really good businessman. He's really open to ideas and thoughts. He had no experience in karting before he started the indoor center. He literally went to Chicago indoor karting, thought it was cool, decided he didn't like wasn't having as much fun in the company that he owned and was running at the time. So, I think he sold it, started Unser. But yeah, he's the kind of guy where you can just walk into his office and pitch something and it never will get shut down. Like, we never squash creativity. So, you know, when he heard the idea, it didn't take much to convince him. You know, I think it's just who I was dealing with. I was dealing with good people and the right people, so it made it simple to do.
Yeah, and I think that's a common thing you hear in a lot of different kind of startup ventures, right? And Unser Centennial especially is still in that startup phase. Is you talk to people, no matter how, what industry it is, it's always, okay, it's about the people, and it's about kind of being in the right place at the right time to be in front of someone like a Scott Sutton. So that's pretty cool. Now, one thing you brought to the table is something you wanted to talk about, and I think is a really interesting conversation, is the difference in the crowd between the performance karting crowd, which I think a lot of our KartPulse fans consider themselves a part of, and the day-to-day rentals. So the people that show up at an Unser Centennial, a K1, a Boondocks, or wherever, and get the concession type carts, the ones that aren't quite as fast but still have some performance to them, have the full bumpers. What would you say is kind of the biggest similarity between those groups, and then what is the largest difference in terms of their consumer attitude and their behavior?
So between corporate and the arrive and drive, or between that arrive and drive and the racer?
I would say the arrive and drive and the racer would maybe be the best two ways to separate it.
Yeah, it's very different, because for the most part, your arrive and drive customer is a person that when they walk in the door, you need to make them feel welcome. You need to make sure that they have a good experience for the next 1 to 2 hours, and that might be the last time that you ever see them.
Right.
If you do a good enough job, they're going to come back, and they'll, but even the most regular of customers are still only out, maybe 10 to 15 times per year, so you don't end up building that very personal relationship with them. Whereas with the kart shop customer, you have people that are testing 2 or 3 days a week. They're racing 10, 15, 20 times a year. You're traveling to other states and areas with them. So it's a customer that you build a very personal relationship with, So I would say on the racing side of it, it's a lot more about the people, and on the arrive and drive side of it, it's a lot more about the experience that the customer gets.
What would you say is some of the similarities you've noticed between the two groups that would surprise people? I mean, obviously both of them enjoy the speed, they enjoy the wheel-to-wheel racing, but one thing that's always intrigued me, and you see a lot, I know in my time working at CKT, we see a lot. We see people say, I went to Unser Denver, or I went to K1 and I had a really fun time, and now I want more. I want more speed. I want more capability. So that seems to be a natural way that people transition from one to the other. But it's always surprised me and always been slightly unclear of what really gets them into performance karting. How do they notice it, and how do they kind of decide to make that leap into something that I think for most people is still a very unknown sport and a very niche kind of thing?
And I mean, if you look at it on paper, right, we have an indoor track, we have an outdoor track, we have a kart shop, so we really do have every opportunity to turn these walk-in customers into outdoor racers, but it's really, really hard. It surprised me when we had the kart shop at the indoor track, how few people actually took any form of interest in it. Even when you put a race card on display, or you put information out and say, visit our kart shop, it was amazing how few people actually seemed to care. I mean, it seemed like most of our customers were a lot happier to go and hit the bar after they were done karting than they were to go and look at some race carts. The outdoor track has definitely changed it, because, while they're sitting there waiting for their next race, they can actually see the race carts going, they can see the performance carts going, and, they can walk up to the people that are driving them and talk to them. So, it's been a lot easier to transition rental customers to racing now that we have the outdoor track, but even there, it's still just very difficult. I mean, a lot of the guys, they just have more interest in taking it more recreationally,
Right. Yeah, I mean, that's one of the things that's always been interesting to me. When I first showed up at Unser Centennial, that transition with having the rentals on site with an active and very consistent kind of influx of customers, and then having a very consistent amount of kind of the performance guys there, that makes a lot of sense. But one thing I've always been curious about is how does that conversation go normally? You know, how do you explain to the normal guy who shows up at a K1 or an Unser Centennial and drives a go-kart that, yeah, it's a go-kart in the basic anatomy, but it's nothing like driving an X30 or a Tag or even a Briggs 206. It's just, you can't put into words kind of the magnitude of difference.
Right.
And you know, Dave Waite just commented. I mean, that's a problem with karting. Maybe not a criticism of the sport itself, but maybe us as racers almost, that you almost have to know someone that's already doing it to get involved in it, right? Or be a race fan and hear about someone talking about, oh, you know, Juan Montoya or whoever started in go-karts before you ever really notice it. And it's always so surprising to me, because when people show up and they watch the karts, like you said, and they see, you know, a Rotax or something go down the straightaway and go through the corners, and it just sticks and it just goes through there. So it's just such a dramatic kind of event and makes such an impression on people. I've always wondered why do we struggle to articulate that to these rental kart racers or these arrive and drive customers?
You know, for a lot of them, you know, like in a lot of the outdoor tracks, ours included, they have a couple different, you know, speed levels of go-kart. So when you get that really interested person, you know, that's doing well, you can kind of qualify them up into different, you know, categories and speed levels. I know, you know, we have a twin engine rental kart. You know, places like DKC have Rotax, like SODI Rotax rental chassis that they kind of graduate people into. But the first thing that every single person says when they see one of those go-karts is, how much does it cost? What's it cost?
Right.
You know, and it's a very difficult question to answer because of how many different levels of karting you can do, right? There's people that spend $3,000 or $4,000 a year, and there's people that spend $150,000 a year. So when someone just says, hey, what's it cost? Like they're expecting a 5-second answer, and it's not really possible to give them that. You know,
right.
But a lot of those lower cost options, like locally for us, the LO206, and we run it, CKT, we run it on a rental kart tire, which is a super affordable tire. I mean, that's our only selling point, because when you tell somebody what a new shifter kart costs, they turn around, they say, hey, that's cool. And then they, you know, go get back in a rental, and they're satisfied.
Right. Yeah, that's always a difficult conversation to have, and one that it seems like your staff at Unser understands maybe a little more than others. Sometimes I get really surprised by that very simple question. You know, how much does a shifter kart cost? Well, a nice one costs like 11 grand with everything new on it, right? But a used one you can get for $1,500. To someone coming out of a rental kart, it's gonna still be a terrifying and eye-opening and eyes like dinner plates kind of experience, right? It's still going to be amazing. So that's always been something that I've been curious about, and I often wonder if us as racers need to have that notion that it's our responsibility to have that nuanced conversation. And yes, maybe people don't want to sit and talk for 30 minutes, but just even the simple comment of, it kind of depends on how serious you are, and kind of depends on how serious you want to take it initially, to maybe not scare off people with that really big price tag right away.
Yeah, I think it really depends on the person that you're talking with. You know, as we were saying on the last show, as racers, we have a tendency to kind of talk people through all the classes. I think that's a really bad idea, especially with how many classes we have. And I honestly think the best approach is to just have a conversation with them and get a sense of where they are at, you know, whether it's just a fleeting interest, or if it's something a little more serious. And then, I mean, for the most part, a lot of the conversations are going to be framed around 206 or an equivalent economical type class. But we can talk about all these different classes and subclasses, and, you know, your pipe and your can, and just confuse living daylights out of people. But I think a lot of it, you know, in our own minds, is that it's important that we need to, one, listen to kind of get a sense of what their interest is, and then in the back of our minds present, you know, it's classic sales, I guess, is present what we feel is going to be most interest to them and something that they can do. Another thing that I find, another conversation I have often, is that, you know, quite often we get the cost of karting mixed up with the value of it.
Right.
And, you know, so when you say shifter cart, you know, 11, let's say 11 to 15 grand. Yeah, that sounds like a lot of money for a go-kart, you know, parentheses. But really, you know, again, as we said in the last show, you're talking about something that's Formula Car performance that you can bring to, you know, at least 60 tracks in the US. And if you really want to, you can race against full-time professional race drivers. So, you know, sometimes you'll hear people compare, say, let's say Spec Miata with the cost of shifters. And to me, it's just not comparable. You know, certainly not comparable on performance-wise. I mean, if you're going to compare something with Spec Miata performance-wise, you're probably talking about 206. And the competition level is still pretty high in 206 at the local and regional levels. So I think those two things, it really are the main core of where we sometimes get off track a little, where we're just trying to give too much information up front. And also at the same time, when they go and try and find out on the internet, you know, we don't live in the information age anymore. The information age is done. We live in, hi, baby.
You live in the live age where things like
yeah,
that.
I'm being attacked by a angry 2-year-old here. So actually, I have a question for you, Greg. So I worked in rental car tracks 15, 20 years ago. And so one of the things I came across was that, you know, a lot of the time, moving people into owner-driver karting almost seemed to be like a conflict of interest in some ways. And I'm just kind of curious how you guys kind of approach that, because I suppose you've got to have like almost a funnel of moving people along these different stages. But I'm curious to hear your thoughts on, you know, how you approach that kind of potential conflict of interest where you've already got your capital and your ongoing expenses invested in running in that rental track. And then, of course, you know, if people move on to owner-driver, it's going to take away from some of that and, frankly, redistribute some of their expendable income into other areas like engine rebuilds and tires and things like that. So I wonder what you thought about that.
No, I mean, it definitely does. But on the other side of it, I'd say anyone that's actually going to move into kart ownership at some point is probably going to get bored with concession karting. You know, they're going to find some other thing to do because we can only do so much to keep them interested. I mean, we'll see this upcoming year where we're going to be doing a lot more like race type events with our rental karts, which I think will help kind of, you know, jumpstart that base. But at the end of the day, if we can keep people interested in our track in general, you know, if they come to our track as a rental car driver or as a test and tune driver, I mean, either way, they're going to be spending money at the track. They're going to be buying tires. They're going to be buying fuel, you know, or they're going to be competing in race events in the rentals or, you know, whatever. So, you know, for us, I mean, we just kind of look at it as whatever we can do to keep people coming back to our facility in general as a whole, we'll do it. And then especially since we have a kart shop on site, you know, we try to capture as many of those additional sales to that customer if they do move into kart ownership.
Yeah. Are you guys based just in Colorado right now? And just remind me how many facilities you have. I think it's two indoor and one outdoor, or just one?
One indoor, one outdoor. Both in Denver, really. One's on the north side, the indoor track is, and then the outdoor track's on the south side of town.
Yeah, I made it to Denver 4 times last year.
Okay.
I didn't get any kart tracks though, unfortunately, but I did manage to connect with Eric a couple of times on layovers and stuff like that. But so that was good.
We are insanely lucky here because we have sprint tracks dotted all over town. We've got one north of town, one west of town. We've got ours. We've got another one within an hour. I mean, we've got so many tracks. So many places don't have that.
Yeah, and they may have, within a state, you may have, say, take California, for example, you may have more tracks, but within a concentrated metro area, it's nowhere near as populated as Denver Metro for whatever reason. James, I know you got to go out to Grand Junction a little bit earlier, but to touch on one thing you mentioned a little bit earlier, Greg, is you know, that conflict of interest is interesting because it's almost like you have almost kind of 2 separate customers. Yes, they're both at the track and they're both using the facility, but as you mentioned, the rental cart driver often is a little more transient. You know, they may be a one and done type customer, whereas if they turn into the performance division, suddenly they're contributing a lot more actively to your track as well as others in the community. And they may stay around 1, 2, 3 more years, right? I think, James, you mentioned that the average life cycle you think estimated is, 3 to 5 years of a performance kart racer.
pretty
Obviously,
much.
it depends on case to case. But I think from a business perspective, you've got to be excited when they come to you and say, hey, I'm kind of interested in that 206, because that means that they're hopefully going to be coming back and using the facility more regularly.
Yeah, for sure. Honestly, another thing I've seen is, we have those rental customers that are out at the track all the time and they end up buying a go-kart. And those guys are so excited and so pumped on it that they bring more people with them than they ever did when they just were there to run a rental program, so they bought their own go-kart and they have every one of their buddies come out and at least see it. And then all their friends drive rental karts, so like I say, it's all about just getting people excited and making sure that people just continue returning to the facility. They tell their friends, they tell their buddies, and, the more people we get out there, the better in any capacity.
Yeah, I think you struck on an interesting or a very important point too. And that is trying to get people to participate in groups, so that there's that shared experience and almost sense of community that they'll want to do it together, and that seems to be stronger. You'll have a group of people that will come back more regularly rather than an individual. Usually, individuals that come back on a regular basis, at least in my experience, are few and far between. There's not as many of them, but in groups you'll get more regular groups, I found. And it sounds like, are you moving towards, at Unter, you're going to do more kind of structured racing to move people towards that direction, like a league? That seems to be kind of the next step, is, for rental customers to start participating in leagues, and some will stay in that league for years. But some might move to owner-driver or move to maybe an outdoor rental like endurance karting or something. But tell us more about what your plans are for that this year.
Yeah, I mean, the big news for us is that we have a new fleet of rental karts coming. And our current rental karts are, they're a used fleet of s1e2s that we use at the indoor center for a couple years. So they basically spent the first couple years of their life just smashing into walls. So the karts, we take care of them, but they're not phenomenal. But with a new fleet, we're looking at doing monthly endurance racing. We're looking at doing some league stuff that's very similar to what CalSpeed does with their Super Series. But that's just it. We kind of looked at some of the other tracks around the country, and you look at what GoPro is doing, and the frequency that they're running rental kart races and the success that they're having. CalSpeed with their Super Series, DKC with their league racing. I mean, they're making it work, and all those places are also actively driving new people into racing. So, we just kind of figure the more events that we can do, the better. So we plan on doing some league stuff. Like I said, a monthly endurance series. We plan on doing some Thursday night racing all summer long. That's both for car owners and for league racers in the rentals. So just kind of a low key, bring it out, super cheap, just have some fun, basically like you said, James, in a group, get people together to do it together. It's way more entertaining.
Yeah, the group thing comes up a lot too when, sometimes we'll say we're trying to introduce people that are already in the automotive enthusiast market or an HBD or something. And sometimes the approach as a kart racer will come up and kind of insult them and be like, your car's slow and stupid, come do karts. And that approach never works, for two reasons. One, you've offended them. And two, again, it's about the community. And what you're really saying is, hey, scrap your friends and come over here where you have no friends. And that's just not, realistic. So like you said, when you get those folks in a group, like, hey, spec me out, guys, come karting and have some fun. I'm sorry you pick up spec me out. It's the first thing that comes to mind. It's maybe the closest thing to a kart, but not close at all. But you get the idea. And just have them come as a group and just try karts, and that's it, low key. And karting to me, and I think for most people, is that, once they get in the seat, they will very quickly decide if it's for them or not. And I think beyond that, there's not a lot more you can do. Unless, of course, you put them in a shifter and they terrify themselves. That's usually a bad idea. But, yeah, it sounds like you got all the right pieces in place. So how long have you been open for now at Munster?
We opened the rentals May 5th of last year, and we were able to get the track back open July of 2016. So we've had the track open for about a year and a half, and then we started the rental program 9 months ago.
So what do you think your biggest goal is going to be this year? What is the heaviest rock that you want to tackle at a dumpster?
Yeah, it's hard to just pick one, to be honest with you. But to me, the really big key for this year is to just make sure that that new cart fleet is moving as often as humanly possible. I just really think that, the more people we can drive into the rental program, the better. So, that's what a lot of my focus will be on this year. We're kind of, dialing back a little bit on the race program, just trying to focus a little more on our track and our facility, and, not do as much traveling and out-of-state stuff as we've done in the past with the race team.
Good deal.
So I don't think this can be a proper Greg Welch broadcast without going beyond just introducing what you do currently, what you've done in the past, and not bringing forth some of the funner stories. Funner isn't a word, but the more fun stories I've heard. And one of them is, I don't think enough people
probably going to be embarrassing.
No, it's not embarrassing. This is karting vocabulary 101 as far as I'm concerned. And this is not a Greg Welch original, but the story's too good to pass up. And that is hookah bucking. I need you to explain to the viewers what that's about, so that we hear that more at the track, because I think that was a great story, and it's a great term to describe kart handling.
That was Chris Wheeler. That was all Chris Wheeler. So I'm sitting at the hotel with Blake Craig down in New Orleans. We were at the Rotax Worlds when they came to the U.S. So we're just kind of hanging out at the hotel. Chris Wheeler walks up to us. I don't think he really knew us, but for him, he also doesn't care. And he just walks up and starts just telling us all sorts of crazy stories, right? And we're just laughing and rolling around. And he comes up with, it's actually huckabucking. He's
huckabucking.
He's like, yeah, you ever seen a go-kart huckabuck? What are you talking about? So yeah, you go into the corner and you get a little overstuck, and the thing will just start huckabucking. We'll just huckabuck right off the track. I think he's talking about a overly tight go-kart that kind of does the hop mid-corner, but yeah, took that term to heart for sure. And anytime I see something that's overstuck, that's a huckabucking go-kart right there.
You're saying that's a good thing or a bad thing? I mean, it sounds like it's bad for ribs, but
it's got to be bad. I mean, it's entertaining when you're on the sidelines, but no, when you're in it, it's definitely bad.
Yeah. Huckabucking. All right. I'm going to make the hashtag.
So speaking of Blake Craig, Adam Kasich posed this question last time, and I think we didn't do it due justice, but I think you've seen this side of the sport a little bit better than we have. But who would you say is, removing your own bias, the best senior driver currently racing? So senior class age, maybe not necessarily by actual age, currently driving in the United States.
Yeah, but I can't do that without removing my bias, For me, I'm a huge fan of Jake Craig. I think that he is, one of, if not the most talented, senior karters in the country. I watch the work ethic that he has. I worked with him a lot, on the data side of things before I really got everything rolling at the track. So, like I say, I've seen his work ethic. I've seen what he can do. And, Jake Craig gets my vote.
All right. And then who would you say, looking back, either someone you raced against or someone that your team raced against, who would you say, best of all time in terms of the person that you've actually physically seen? Maybe not, a Pantano or someone that people talk about on forums, from many years ago that people may not know, but within your career and your tenure, when you think back, comparing them to someone like Jake or the current age, what do you think is the biggest difference there?
Yeah, I mean, I never really got to watch any single speed racing growing up. because we raced shifters and we ran like Pro Moto Tour West and East, and we primarily were shifters, and we ran 60s, 80s, you know, all that stuff. But one of the standouts that comes to mind would be Alex Speed.
Mm-hmm.
He was pretty phenomenal. And I'd say the other one, my brother used to race against him, but AJ Allmendinger was like a true, you know, he was truly legit in a go-kart. He was really, really good.
He was also, there's a lot of stories of him being pretty fiercely protective of his space on the track as well, driving over other competitors and being pretty aggressive. So, yeah, those are two names you hear thrown around a lot, so no surprises there. What would you say the average kart driver could do to be more like a Jake Craig or an AJ Allmendinger, setting aside just simple work ethic? What is one area that everyone, if they focus on, could raise their game and really make huge strides to maybe not beat those people, but get a lot closer?
You know, I think at the end of the day, a lot of it really just does come to, you know, how much time you're willing to dedicate to it. The more that you can be in the seat, I think the better. I don't think enough of these people drive often enough. And on the other side of it, trying to have some form of game plan for what you're doing on any given day definitely helps. But I think one of the big things I see lacking in new racers and new people is just like a form of self-confidence, you know? Like these guys, they don't necessarily think they're as good, so they kind of hold themselves back just from a self-confidence standpoint. I'm not sure how you fix that or change that, but I think that's something that holds a lot of young racers back.
That's interesting. Yeah, one thing I've noticed, at least just in my own career, is there's a lot more of these people that go to these really big events without having a large, solid base of hours and hours and hours of testing or a lot of local racing. It's kind of, you know, do a season of a few races here, and then they go to the big race, and when they struggle, they're very perplexed. So yeah, I think the work ethic and being willing to put the time in always helps. You know, the 10,000 hours kind of philosophy to anything makes a lot of sense. Another question you brought up, actually in the comments last time, Greg. See, we pay attention to the comments. We notice people like Dustin who tune in. Is the Briggs 206 specific chassis? Is it worth it, in your opinion, from a manufacturer perspective, or is it really worth it from, you know, a driving perspective for the average racer? Do you need to have a super soft chassis to be competitive in 206, or can you run just a standard tag chassis as long as you know how to tune it?
I mean, my opinion is that the tag chassis is as good for sure in 206. I think, you know, I don't want to take anything away from the 206 go-karts because they're great. They're a good thing. They need to exist. I've driven quite a few of them. I've liked every single one of them I've driven. We've done the Comp Kart 4R. I've driven the Intrepid FK4. You know, both of those are really good go-karts. I know the VLR Emerald obviously is a good one. But I, at least in my opinion, think a lot of those go-karts are kind of designed to hit a price point, which is what needs to be for people to actually get into it. But I would put a standard 30 mil tag chassis up against any of the 206 Pacifics any day of the week. And I think that they'll be, you know, the same.
Yeah, I think especially in a lot of classes you look and you see nationwide, you know, just at least in the United States, you know, locally Colorado, Greg and I are familiar with the Duro tire, which obviously isn't exactly the grippiest tire, the fastest tire, but it does keep costs low. And if everyone's running on it, it's the same. It's kind of hilariously underperforming sometimes, and I enjoy that from a driving perspective. But a lot of others are just running on, you know, a Vinco Blue, which is a pretty hard tire in itself. So I've heard a lot of people say that comment, you know, that yeah, a four-cycle specific chassis, if you build it right, can be a great chassis, but you don't necessarily have to have it if you kind of know what you're working with. I think that's an interesting comment, something I hadn't considered about building it to a price point rather than really making it a better chassis for a specific engine. You know, I think a good go-kart to a certain extent is a good go-kart regardless of to a certain extent what engine's on it. Another one someone asked in the forums in KartPulse, and one that I was stumped by, is the notion of an optimal weight for a racing driver. So in a kart, for example, obviously, if you're a lighter driver, that means that there's going to be more lead on the go-kart. If you're a light driver but you're really tall, often some drivers will struggle with certain chassis just because the test driver or the person that they built it for was not that big. Do you think that there is an optimal weight for a racing driver kind of regardless in karting? Do they need to be kind of a jockey size, or should they be a little taller so they work the go-kart more? Does it really matter?
You know, you definitely have to set everything up differently for the different driver sizes, you know, especially height when you have your, you know, driver that just moved out of cadets and they're super small. Like it can be tricky to get a junior chassis to work well for them. But, you know, honestly, I think it's better to have to put weight on the go-kart.
Right.
I think you definitely can get to the point where you're putting too much weight on the go-kart. But I think if you're 20 to 30 pounds under weight and you have to put between 20 and 30 pounds on the go-kart, that's probably the most ideal. I don't think height matters as much. I'm super tall myself, so you know, getting me to fit in the cadet chassis was a really big struggle. We had to cut the fronts and extend the porches on every single one of them. But yeah, I don't think height's that bad. I don't think it's that big a deal.
So in your opinion, then, it's less about the dimensions of the driver and more about simply having more weight to work with, being able to put that weight where you want it, say lower down, forward, back, or wherever, rather than saying it being in someone's tummy or someone's head or someone's neck, where you really can't move it around. The reason I thought of that question and why I think it's kind of relevant now is a few years ago, you know, it was a big series controversy with Danica Patrick. Big series controversy with different genders of drivers and inherently that less weight, and engineers complaining about being able to put the weight kind of where they want to, and it's an unfair advantage. So definitely an interesting thing to consider. Let's see. Well, I think we have a couple other older Facebook comments, but I wanted to open it up to you, Greg. I mean, what questions do you have for our viewers or for us that you think we should be talking about that are kind of the issues of today?
You know, nothing straight off the top of my head. I'm kind of curious to see what our viewers are thinking. I see one that just came in from Dave Waite. What happened to the Bridgestone ABC compound? James, do you have any insight on this?
I didn't know they went away. So did they change them in future?
You know, I don't. To my record, I haven't seen the softer compounds recently. The A compound stuff. I haven't seen that recently, but I'm not sure that they actually went away.
Yeah, they may not be getting imported a whole lot, because I think really in the US they might be using autocross. Really, that would be about it, because I don't think any series runs the A, the B and C, sure, but the A is the CIK soft. But maybe David, you can clarify on what your question's about there, because I don't know if what we're saying is that they have changed the naming of the tire from ABC, A being the softest, C being the hardest of that range, and then they have the YDS, which is their Duro. Out of curiosity, actually, what are you guys running for your 206? You said you're using an endurance tire or a rental car tire?
Yeah, we use a Duro.
Yeah, I don't know the actual model number. Greg could speak to that better because I believe he's the importer for the state. But the Duro tire is essentially the same tire. I would guess most people never bother to, but if you ever walk up to a rental cart and you look at the actual tire, it'll say Duro or Jacuzzi or something like that. And they're these rock hard tires compared to what most performance kart racers are used to. But the life that our 206 racers out here get compared to a traditional set of tires is really pretty phenomenal. And yes, the karts are slower, and yes, they don't maybe carry quite as much speed through the corners, but if everyone is on the same tire, it saves money for the racer. It makes it that more accessible level of racing, from a cost perspective for people that get into it. And the other thing is, with a really hard tire like that, it makes it so that some of the really kind of older chassis that people may buy on the used market can still be competitive if you kind of are a smooth and methodical driver. That's one thing that we see out here in Colorado a lot is some of the older chassis that may struggle a little bit more with a stickier tire are able to be a little bit more competitive, I think, with the Duro tire. That's just my opinion and kind of what I've noticed. Dave commented that we don't use the A, B, or C compound in Canada anymore. I know Bridgestone about a decade ago had a much bigger presence in the United States. I can't speak for Canada than they do now. And I don't know if that's necessarily that Bridgestone doesn't manufacture car tires anymore. I think it's just like a lot of things. Why is a certain engine package more popular now than many years ago? So I think Bridgestone's still
more to do with the deals and economics up there, I guess. I mean, especially if you consider how prevalent Rotex was until recently. One would imagine that they were probably running Mojo. I could be wrong on that, but yeah, we've seen less and less Bridgestones. But I guess tire brands come and go, and we see it in waves. A long time ago, it was a lot of Dunlop, and now it's a lot of MG and their I guess the Vinco too, and Vega, especially on the 206 and the 206 Cup, are using Vega. So yeah, it's just ebbs and flows, and I guess tracks and clubs and series are able to reach a deal with these tire manufacturers, and then other years they have what they feel are more lucrative deals. So I guess they go with those. The only thing that stays the same is change.
So Adam Kasich is back on the ranking world driver train. He's asking, recently British drivers seem to be a little bit quicker at some of the international events rather than, say, an American or maybe other countries. And Australia is also doing quite well, turning out a lot of top drivers. Greg, any thoughts on why that's happening? Where would you say the United States ranks in terms of karting today versus maybe a few years ago, turning it a little more internationally focused?
I think on our formats, the formats that we run here, we're very competitive, especially, when other drivers come here. I do think that we struggle a little bit when we go to Europe. Now we've had, a few exceptions recently to that, with Norberg. Like Norberg was on the podium at the X30 Worlds. Dante Yu qualified second in senior. But at the end of the day, it was, British drivers that won almost every category. And some of it, I think, is just, knowing the tracks that are there, the tires that are there, the engine formulas that are there. Dave Waite has commented, Europeans are way more aggressive than us over here. In my experience, when I went to the X30 Worlds this summer, I didn't see that at all. I thought that they were the same level of aggressive that we were here. I've always heard that, but I don't think it's something I necessarily witnessed when I was there. And with Britain right now, it might just be strength in numbers. Like there's a ton of them, and they're all driving against each other every weekend. And, those guys are crazy, and they drive in the snow and they drive in the rain, and any time that there is, Yeah, Adam Kasich, weighing pole at Rotex, he was. Derek Wang stuck it on pole at the Rotex World. So, I wouldn't take anything away from the Americans.
Yeah, and I think that's a good point. You hear a lot about how Americans don't get you hear two main arguments. I think from a lot of people. Americans don't get a fair shake internationally, or there just aren't as many, or they aren't just as good. And I think recently, you've seen the Americans that put the work in and that have the resources and can do it, or the North Americans, I guess, in Derek Wang's case, that they run just fine. So I think at the end of the day, both are able to drive the go-kart pretty well. But one thing that's interesting about Europe compared to the United States is, at least in Britain, the volume of kart drivers might be maybe roughly the same, we could argue, but they're all in this very tight-knit community, whereas in the United States, we're very regional, we're very spread out. Someone may race, in their state and race in 5 tracks in their state, race against the same guys, but then you have another group on the West Coast that's kind of separated, and that the two don't mix except maybe at the regional and national level, which maybe hinders the ability for the cream to really rise to the top. I don't know. That's one thing that I've heard from some United States tuners that go over to Europe. Dustin, you commented about the ROC engine package. I'm not quite sure what you were asking there. Moving into next week, I'm not quite sure what that entails.
Challenge.
Yeah.
I mean, if this means I get to drive one next week, great. I'm looking forward to it.
No, I mean, Dustin, I have a feeling you're talking about Challenge the Americas because it's coming up this next weekend. It'll be my first experience with the ROC. I have no experience with the ROC GP at all. I do get to drive one on Thursday, so I'm looking forward to that. But I've never worked on them before, so curious to see.
Well, let's see. I mean, the other comments that I have here, we're not getting a ton in our Facebook Live today. I noted that last episode, the comment about dirt racing, I think was something that we didn't really spend enough time talking about. The difference between driving a kart on dirt versus oval racing. I know Eric, and it looks like Adam said, there's over 100 entries for PKRA for the Kota race, which is good. I think it means that it'll be hopefully a good event. But I think it's interesting to think about that difference in the culture and the challenge. I know that here in Colorado specifically, there was a pretty serious effort. I'm not 100% sure where it's going to go now, but to get that dirt oval racing going back again. But Greg, was that something you never did in the area growing up, or was it pretty much only just sprint style racing?
I've never driven on an oval in anything, so I'm green to it. I have no clue. Different world to me. I can tell you for dirt, I really I've seen those guys that build like road course type tracks in the backyard on dirt, and that piques my interest. That's something I definitely would like to try.
Is that something that Unser would ever build?
It doesn't sound like it'd take a whole lot of work, right? Like, just mow the grass.
It's about mowing the grass, but it's also how you prep it. I mean, I think initially people would just be excited about it, but then it takes a lot more maintenance and sometimes an asphalt track. But you see those videos from people in Australia, and they have this big field in the dirt track, and they race on, it looks like rain tires. That looks like a blast. Looks like a lot of fun. I think a road race on a dirt track would be pretty fun. Dave Waite's commenting, what's the word on the Honda Moto shifters leaving? Scusa dropping Moto now. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I think Tom Kutcher commented recently that they're not moving away from it just yet. They're looking at consolidating some of the shifter classes for now, but they are obviously testing very heavily the IME 175. So, Greg, what's your thought on that? Should we fully ditch the Honda CR125, the powerhouse, the workhorse of shifter kart racing nationally or and locally often, or do you think it's time for a change?
I think regardless of what direction any national sanctioning body goes with their shifter programs, there's always going to be a really big Honda following. Because there's too many of them out there. There's too many that exist. I mean, look at the KT100, right? Like, I have a feeling the Honda will be the KT100 of shifter kart racing. And regardless of how many people, try to stop running it or try to get rid of it, it's still there. It's still around. It's always going to be around. So, that's kind of how I view the Honda.
And I think that speaks to a larger point, which is at the end of the day, not every racer is going to jump on the next greatest engine package right away, right? They know how to work on their engine that they have, and they want to race what they have. And so at the end of the day, regionally, that's another challenge, I think, for the United States versus maybe some other very smaller and very concentrated countries, is everyone wants to race what they already have. And change sometimes is a little scary. So that's a good question, Dave. I think time will tell. I suspect you're right, Greg, that the Honda has been around so long, and overall for a shifter cart engine has pretty decent reliability and lots of parts available, and they're accessible. That I think they'll be around to some extent, kind of regardless of whether it's at a national or regional or local level. It will take a long time for them to really fade out completely if they ever do.
I mean, we've kind of seen it. Sorry, James, go ahead.
Yeah, go. I think they're going to be around for a while, but the writing is on the wall. I know for sure in the UK, CR250 parts, not exactly the same engine, but they're done. Like, they're completely done, good, and they're drying up. And I know that, in the past there's been some supply issues, temporary ones. If we go back 6 years or so for what was 99 cylinders, and we had the 01. My understanding of the way SKUSA are going to handle this transition, and it is going to be a transition, is they're going to start off the 175 Super Shifter is going to be their S1 motor, and I believe it's going to cascade down from there. But that's subject to change too. But yeah, they have been testing it very heavily. I took a look at it in Vegas there, and it looks like an impressive package. It's going to have its own challenges in that it's completely different to anything else that's really raced outside of the X30 World Cup. It's going to be by itself. So it needs to be a really appealing package to get enough traction. And, looking at driver feedback on driving them so far, I mean, it seems to be pretty positive, which you would expect. It's 175cc, so it's got some punch. Carburetor is pretty interesting. If you haven't seen it already, it's actually a pump diaphragm similar to what you see in a tag. It's got, 2 jets, and then it's also got an idle air screw. But they're still working on that. I think initially when they started testing, they were having problems cracking reeds and stuff like that. But from what I understand, they've resolved it. But I think, the moto is going to be around for a while. How long it'll be with SKUSA, I mean, that remains to be seen. And I don't know if anybody really has the answer, because that kind of thing is dynamic. It depends on what SKUSA decide to do, and it also depends on how the market reacts to it. Ultimately, at the end of the day, for the S1 class, most of those folks from an S1 are already spending, a pretty penny on engines anyway. So, not to be unsympathetic, but, shifting to 175 may not be as difficult for them. But we will see. I think really the 2001 cylinder, which we were forced due to supply to use, started a downward trend, I think, for stock moto. Because of the extra complications and just that they run closer to the edge. And, SKUSA had to make a couple of changes. They added a change of fuel that you use, higher octane, to prevent some of the detonation issues that we're having with the 01, because its exhaust port timing is a little bit more aggressive. But 175, I'm sure it'll be fun to drive, at least, and we'll see where it goes from there. I mean, it's a bit of a bummer because we've got IAME and we've got Vortex doing their own thing, trying to do a land grab, and in this case the 175, of course, is just not compatible with a 125. I mean, you'd have to turn it into a sled, I think, to make it comparable to a 125. I guess we'll see. Maybe we should talk with Tom and kind of get some clarity on what their plan is at the moment, at least for the 175. But from what I understand, in the same way that they handled the Leopard, it was a transition. They gave people plenty of warning. And also they did a really good job, I believe, of communicating the plan that was going to happen, and also locking the regulations in. Because a lot of the time we'll get a new engine or a newer engine to us, and then something will change. And it can be performance or otherwise. Either way, it's usually an added cost, and perceptions that at the very least it's a pain in the ass. So to look at your comments there, Dave, with the amount of money involved and so forth, and hurt the karting community even more, I'm not sure if it's really going to hurt the karting community. I mean, really, our hand is being forced. Honda are going to stop making the parts at some point, and there's no reason why. To put it in perspective, if we think of the SKUSA Pro Tour, we're talking about, let's say, 300 drivers out of 20,000. So, if we put that in perspective, it's really not that big of a deal. As long as there's parts knocking around and people, keep making them, maybe there'll be an aftermarket. Maybe somebody will start making some aftermarket parts for cylinders, whatever dries up first. But I think we're probably not going to see that in the Pro Tour. And that makes sense, because I would expect SCUSA, given the level of competition that they have, they want to be able to ensure consistency. And, I think with IAMI, they've done a good job with the X30, and with the 175 shifter, we'll see where it goes. But, I don't think I characterize it as hurting the karting community. It's just, in this case, it's not change for the sake of change. It is driven from parts availability. That's my understanding. And of course, the alignment with IAMI makes sense. Why not? It's a good package. It's a good brand. They're well known. They've been around pretty much since the beginning of kart racing, so they know how to make reliable engines. We've got the KA too. So that's what I think.
I think Greg is a big believer in the KA. He's been doing some testing locally. Interesting to see where that goes. Most of the engines that they've come out with recently, people seem, if not at worst, lukewarm on them, pretty positive on their reliability. So I think it's always tricky. And you feel bad sometimes for a really good engine package that comes out, whether it's IAMI or whatever it is, and objectively it is a great engine, but either the timing was wrong or there's already a good engine. And so sometimes, you can have a great product and it just doesn't take off because of things that are out of your control. I think James is right, though, that at the national level where you're really, really stressing the engines, there's been so many issues with running such a high-strung Honda, right? And obviously at the highest level of the sport, you will stress any engine to the maximum level, that then you have to look at, okay, how can we dial this back to where something that theoretically for many years didn't cost quite as much is now really making it even more challenging. And that's one of the interesting things about motorsports is no matter the purest of intentions, how spec something is in nature, if you open up the rules just a little bit, people take a mile and they can really make it difficult for the little guy to keep up sometimes. But yeah, Dave, I think it's taken the small guy like me out of it. That might be true at the S1 level, and I think maybe what SCUSA and Tom and the 175 is, maybe their intention. I won't speak for them, but maybe their intention is to try to at least make it a little bit more reasonable, long term, for someone to buy an engine and feel like they can go run with the big boys. But I think it's also important to realize that there are many different ways to challenge yourself in karting, whether it's running a shifter, or you can go run a 206 at a national level, and that's still going to be a reliable engine, right? So I think it's important to look at the different avenues that you can take with karting.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, certainly for the Pro Tour, I mean, there's no very inexpensive way to run it. It's just the nature of the competition, and even just the travel, unless you happen to live by the by each track, which means you need 3 or 4 houses. You're not going to be able to do it on a teeny budget like you would at a local track, just because of logistics. But again, I'm not sure if it's going to take the smaller guys out. At the end of the day, it'll find the balance, and there'll be there's already, I don't know how many quote unquote small guys. I don't know how we want to characterize that or determine what a small guy is. But I'm not sure how many of those are participating in the Pro Tour. And again, when we're talking about this 175, it's going to be initially brought in for S1. So 30 drivers, maybe, that's really what we're talking about. So there's plenty of time before I think we need to be concerned about it. But yeah, Milton Riviera making a comment about the supposed cost of some cylinders. I mean, it depends on who you ask, but sometimes you'll hear people say for the 2001 cylinders will trade for as much as $2,000, but that's a classic case of sometimes perception being reality. I think a lot of it, like anything else, comes down to it's going to be driving and tuning, especially on a temporary track, in my opinion, at least. Some people will disagree.
I mean, two points I want to grab on, James, that you made. I mean, really, there was a big change in the Honda program when we were forced into the 2001 cylinder, for sure. Because, I think the parity was a little bit closer on the 99s. I think the reliability was a little bit better on the 99s. But, you know, what a lot of people forget is that there was absolutely no choice. We basically had to go to 2001 cylinders because it was, you know, 75 or 80% of the year we're sitting there waiting for cylinders. I mean, guys didn't even have anything to run with. So it kind of forced the 2001 cylinder on everyone. And that was kind of when it started, you know?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, the other thing to kind of, I think, to bring in here, I just noticed that David mentioned about money and the cost. You know, now's probably a good time to bring into discussion the fact that, you know, a prepared stock moto new is at least $6,000, and you can buy a rock for about 36 or less. So, you know, that's something to put in perspective too. If you're thinking of racing, you're thinking of racing shifters, and you know, you're looking to hedge your bets. If there's rock races around you, it's certainly a good way to go. Or if your local track or regional track has an open shifter format, which I think sooner or later we're going to see more tracks go that way as this thing cascades down. But we're still at least a year, if not more, before I think we start to see this trickle down, you know.
And I think Adam Kasich brings up a good point, you know, that at this point, no matter who you are, unless you're a really experienced motor builder, which I don't think any of us are, but Greg's probably the closest by far. I think the hope is that, at least what SCUSA, I suspect, is thinking is they hope that it will be a reliable engine that, yes, maybe isn't the most cost-effective thing ever, but what national level shifter kart racing is, that will have similar parity and results, at least initially. Because I think what we're hearing here, both from James and from Greg and from the comments, is that people are acknowledging that at least at the elite level, at an S1, S2, S3, S4 level, the stock Honda is no longer really feasible financially or physically, having the parts available. So I think at that point, if you're an organization like SCUSA, or if you're an importer, you have to start looking at other options, whether it be the 175 or something else, just to find something that is ultimately going to make a difference and move the needle somewhat in the right direction, to where the people that are leaving the track saying, why bother because I can't afford it, at least feel like there's more of a chance. So one thing on the KP forums, and I know one thing that's really important to James and Davin, who also is heavily involved in KartPulse, is considering, you know, really stepping back from the micro of, okay, this engine package or that engine package, and really focusing on, you know, what is karting really about for the 20,000 rather than the 300. And I know, Greg, you meet both of those types of customers that walk into Unser Karting Centennial regularly, but what would you say you wish the average racer did, not necessarily for their kart racing program, but just to keep perspective, that for most of us, it's a weekend hobby, a very serious hobby that we invest a ton of money, a ton of time, and a ton of effort into. But at the end of the day, we're there because we like to compete and we like to compete with our friends. And what would you say is the biggest thing that you wish people that walked on Unser Centennial or any other kart track in Colorado or the United States kept in mind more often?
I mean, I'd say that, you know, realistically, we're not gonna be moving, you know, at least once you get to the adult ages, right? Like we are now, like that we are there for fun. We do have to go to work the next day. And just, you know, kind of remember why you continuously come back to do this, which is, you know, that it's fun and, you know, there is a huge community aspect to it. And that, you know, to me, it seems like the more successful, at least clubs, you know, local level clubs are the ones that really try to engage the community aspect of it, in addition to a solid racing program.
Well, I think that's a good point. James, were there any topics that you saw in the comments or that we haven't brought up that you think are pressing right now?
Oh, there's tons in there, but getting back to all of them is another thing. We'll have to catch up on those, and we'll go through them after the show, I think, and then see what we have for next week.
Yeah, I think we've picked Greg's brain a lot. We really appreciate you coming on and taking so much time to talk to us about your career, your perspective, and then we've had so many people weigh in with questions. This time it was a lot about shifter kart racing, but you know, if that's that for now, then maybe it's time to wrap things up. I don't know.
I think so. I think we've been on for a little over an hour, so I think that's a decent session. Episode 2. Eric, thanks for joining us. Greg, also, thanks for joining us. And
thank you guys for having me.
And let us know if you either do a snow track or one of those sprint tracks on dirt. I think when you mentioned Chris Wheeler earlier, I know that he tried to get something like that going a few years ago. And I'm not sure what happened, but I know that he's just like a super crazy busy dude. So I'm guessing he just had something else come up. But they were going to do something up here in Indy. They were talking about doing like a sprint layout on dirt, but hasn't happened yet. Let's see.
Sounds cool. I'm in. Whenever it happens, I'll be there. Yeah. I'll bring my KA.
There you go. Put a big airport there. All right. Thanks, guys. We'll see everybody next week. Thanks, everybody who signed in to the show and leave a comment. And we'll talk to you shortly.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks, guys.